Happy Easter. He is risen. He is risen indeed. I hope you've had a good week, a good Passion Week, a good week that we spend reflecting on Christ and reflecting on the acts and the different things that He did some 2,000 years ago on this week. Well, we are on Easter morning, the glorious day where we acknowledge and remember Christ is conquering the tomb, conquering the grave. Can you imagine how the women would have felt when they came to the tomb? I mean, what would they have been thinking as they heard the words from the angels that He's not there? He is risen. He is not there. They came expecting Him to be there, and then He wasn't there. Now, the honest truth is they probably shouldn't have been really surprised. I mean, Jesus had told them numerous times. He said, I would rise on the third day. He had said it enough that in Mark, they mentioned it in chapter 8, chapter 9, and chapter 10. In 8, Jesus says, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that He must be killed, and after 3 days rise again. Mark 9 says, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill Him, and after 3 days He will rise. Mark 10 says, we are going up to Jerusalem, Jesus said, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and teachers of the law. They will condemn Him to death and will hand Him over to the Gentiles, who will mock Him, spit on Him, flog Him, and kill Him. 3 days later, He will rise. When Mark quotes Jesus' words here about His death and resurrection 3 times, it means that Jesus has been saying this a lot. He's been saying this over and over again. And something that this would have been something that would have been hard for the disciples to ignore. I mean, we have the case where Peter says, "Oh, that's not going to happen to Jesus," and Jesus rebukes him. But other than that, we don't have too many things where that they really responded to this. But He would have told His disciples over and over again that this was happening. But none of them believed. None of them believed. The 2 Marys that came to the tomb were bringing expensive perfumes and spices that were literally they were going to bind His body, anoint it, and basically finish preparing it for the tomb. They didn't expect Him to be missing or gone or risen. Or how, they had no clue that would happen. And they'd seen Lazarus rise from the dead on the 4th day of his death. They seen that happen. Still they didn't believe. The angels tell the women on the tomb, you will see him just as He has told you. Here's the point with all this. The resurrection, as inconceivable as it is for the first disciples to get, it was impossible for them to believe. It's just as hard as it for us to accept things like this today. I've heard over and over again, it's like, well, that's not possible. This couldn't happen. Things like this don't happen. And I'm like, you doubt this, but you believe something else. And I wonder, and our reasons are different. And it's not that we can see Jesus physically and then like says, well, how would He do that? I mean, we doubt His resurrection sometimes. Some of us, you might doubt yourself, but you might not doubt that. But the doubt that sort of is under the surface that you sort of are like, I don't know. it carries over into other things. And so there's other things that you doubt that are connected. It's like, will God really answer my prayers? Does anything really ever change? Does God care about the world we're in with all the weird stuff? I mean, where is He? Can I be a better person? I've failed so much. Why would He? I don't believe He'd want me. Will this pain go away? Will life get any easier? Will these circumstances that at one point they were just annoyances and then they became overwhelming and then they became a joke because it's like how, and now they're at this point of like, this isn't even a joke anymore. It's so heavy. How am I supposed to, I question, how can God let me deal with all that? I mean, how can I serve in a church? I doubt. So the reality is we believe, but we can't believe or do this or do that. We put limits, we create all this stuff. And so when we come to Easter, we say we believe with Jesus rising from the dead, but in the back of our mind, there's doubts about connected things, or it's like, okay, well, He did that then, but He doesn't do stuff today. So we have these doubts and they live in the background. They live in the background, and it's sort of one of those things that we don't really want to talk about or acknowledge. Especially on Easter, we're supposed to be all excited and exhilarated and all this fun stuff today because He is risen. But we doubt. We become like the disciples. I mean, the last couple weeks have been very tense for me, and I know a lot of us have felt the tensions of the last year, and these tensions that we feel, they sort of just they get so strong, and then so when something exciting or good or positive happens, there's like, yeah, okay, is it really good? Is this really right? And we doubt and we doubt. And I can imagine these women are like, what happened? The disciples, when Jesus talked about His death in Mark 9, what is He saying? I mean, after Jesus said this, they respond with this. They says, but they did not understand what He meant and were afraid to ask Him about it. You know, I this week we had the Maundy, Thursday stuff where we had the where we celebrated Jesus's Last Supper and all that stuff. And I sit there and I was thinking about it. It's like I could see the disciples sitting at the table with Jesus, confused and too afraid to ask Him, like, why are we doing this early? Why are we doing this the day before? Why? But they didn't want to ask. The fear, He's the teacher, He knows all. I mean, you know, now we question a lot more in our society, but they didn't back then. You know, if the teacher, the leader said something, you're like, okay, we're going to do it. We're going to listen, even though I don't agree. Today, we just doubt everything, right? We don't agree with anything. We'll just turn it off, like, you know, we'll move on or this or that, and then it's a mess. If we put ourselves in their environment, would we have doubted too? I mean, we doubt now, right? I mean, some of us doubt about all kinds of crazy stuff. I mean, it's not, I mean, it doesn't feel crazy to us, but we doubt about all kinds of different things. And the reality is our doubts don't help us move forward. I mean, we get stuck in our doubts. It's sort of like the Groundhog movie, the Bill Murray Groundhog movie, where Bill Murray keeps reliving the same day over and over again. If we feel like our doubts just never go away, it's like we're reliving the same question after day. It's like, why does this keep having to happen? Why is this way? Why this issue over and over and over again? We see the ones we love and we see them returning to their vomit, and we're like, why does this happen? And we look at Jesus, at his actions, we look at this whole thing, and it's hard for us to put ourselves on the cross or at the cross, because we see these big pictures, we see all this stuff, and it's like we would have ran away like the disciples, right? I mean, we couldn't do that. Our doubts are too big. And we don't have the physical Jesus here even to help us believe. So we believe, sort of, but we don't. Now there's a moment when we look at this whole thing, and we look at Jesus and what led him to the cross and this whole thing, and we have a tendency to get stuck on all these big things that happen. But the reality is, it was a small thing, one simple small thing that really led him to the cross. And if he wouldn't have done it, everything would have been different. The moment would have passed, everything would have changed, and it was one small moment. I mean, we normally, when we focus on this week, we focus on the Last Supper, like I mentioned, the clearing of the temple, like, oh, well, this is what caused him to get killed. Jesus' time in the garden praying, all these things, his arrest, the cross, the tomb. We focus on all these big things. But there's something small that Jesus did on this week that set the whole path in motion to the cross and to the tomb and to this to setting here on Easter. We're saying he is risen, which is exciting. It all started with something small. And John's gospel tells us about it. It's where Jesus is recorded as saying a simple phrase to Judas, the one that betrayed him. He says, what you're going to go do, what you're about to do quickly. Now, this phrase isn't much, but it is the ultimate moving everything forward. Jesus set everything into motion at that point that was beyond him at this time. He put Judas in action, that he would go and get the leaders and get the crowd and get the mob to come and arrest him. I mean, he could have waited. I mean, Judas left because Jesus told him to go. If he would have waited, the crowd would have been different. The timing, everything would have been different. And would it even happened? I mean, it was a push to have him crucified before the Sabbath the next night. But it was so tight that if Judas wouldn't have gone when he did, would they have actually done everything? Or would they have held him over for another week? Or what would have happened? Everything would have been different. I mean, the reality is Jesus could have waited. He could have stopped Judas. I mean, I don't know if we realize, think about this, where, he says, if let this cup pass and all these things, but he didn't have to say that phrase to Judas, and everything would have been different. Even when he was encountered in the garden, he allowed himself to be arrested, but it all starts with this phrase, what you're about to do quickly. Jesus knew he was calling Judas what Judas was called to do in this midst. He knew this whole situation, where Judas would go, what Judas would be doing. It was hard, and he still did it. Late that night, Jesus prayed so intense that his sweat was like blood. But here's the truth. We sit here on Easter morning, and he is risen. He is alive. We have doubts. There's nothing wrong with that. We have doubts in our life. It's hard to trust if it's going to be different, it's going to be better. We doubt if we can change. We doubt if life can be any better. We see story after story where we see the world around us that makes us doubt if any of this will ever get better. We see the disciples doubt. But Sunday's here. Jesus overcame death. Jesus made a way for us to overcome our doubt. but it isn't easy. It's not easy to overcome the doubt that has persisted under the surface because we try to ignore it. We try to push it off to the side. We don't feel like we're worthy. We don't feel like we're good enough. But we don't have to live on that side of doubt in the darkness of the cross. Now it's hard. I know it's hard. And I know it's hard to give up the doubts because first thing we have to acknowledge that we have those doubts, and we've lived in the church, a lot of us, for a long time, and we've sat there and said to ourselves that I can't be honest. It's sort of like the disciples, that they didn't want to admit that they didn't agree with Jesus because then they would be called out. They saw what happened to Peter, right? Peter got called, he was rebuked by Jesus. And so we question, are we going to be rebuked? Are we going to be this or that? And I can give you reason after reason. And the church does this all the time. We give reasons why Jesus is risen from the dead. And some of them are convincing to us, and some of them were like, okay, I hear all this stuff, I understand all this stuff, but I still doubt. The women becoming the first people to the tomb, okay, women, that's odd, but it was odd in their day. It wouldn't be odd today. Disciples allowing themselves to be killed after this thing. Why would they believe something like this if and allow themselves to be killed if it wasn't true? Jesus appeared to over 500 people in 40 days. It wasn't like he disappeared to like 2 people. There was a large group. The fact that Paul went from persecuting the Christians to actually following them and following their leading and following as a apostle of Christ, even with all that, our doubts can still exist. Even though with all the things and all the truths and all the stuff I could tell you, our doubts still exist, where we just don't feel worthy to overcome it. And so we live there. But the reality is there was a place in my life where my doubt shifted and moved away. I doubted a long time. But it all went away in a small moment with only a few words. A moment that led me honestly beyond this other side of the cross, where I don't doubt his existence. I don't doubt his ability to answer prayers. I don't doubt that he loves us and we can change and all that stuff. And it all started with a small step. We can live on the Friday side of the cross. We can live on the side of yesterday where there's doubts and there's fear and there's darkness. We can live there and think that there's no path beyond us. But it all has to start with a small step. And see, Jesus knew if we made those steps, things would change. He told his disciples in John 14 that if they would follow him, he says this, very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the work that I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these because I am going to the Father. Do you realize Jesus said that we could be doing greater things than the stuff he did? That's hard to believe again too, right? He said this hours before the disciples ran away. Hours before Peter disowned him. Hours before his death. Greater things. Do you believe you can do greater things than Jesus did? The reality is Jesus doesn't doubt that we can follow him. He doesn't doubt you. He believes that you can do greater things than him. Because he sees beyond Friday. He sees beyond the doubt. He sees beyond the darkness of this moment. He sees beyond the things we can't see. He sees that his followers, when we are filled with his love, we can do great things. He trusts you with the future of his church. He trusts you with his message of redemption and restoration to the world. He trusts that you will share the love that he gives to you. What side of the cross are you living on? The Sunday side, where the tomb is empty? Or on Friday, where the tomb is the destination? We can doubt, and we can doubt. Jesus said when he entered Jerusalem, he cried over the city. He says, if you knew what brings you, it would bring you peace on this day. We don't always know, and you don't know, and you're like, how do I overcome the doubt in the midst of this? And it's actually honestly very simple. Take a step. What does a step look like? Believe. What does that mean? What does that mean? Well, how do I believe? How do I take that step? Well, trust. Well, how do I trust? The same thing as believe, right? Put something in his hands. Follow his leading in something. You know, when it comes to money, follow his leading in your money. He tells us in Scripture. He tells us in his word. He tells us how to act, how to live. He tells us to seek him, to follow after him. And to follow after him is to be where he's at, to take a step. Now, most of us have taken steps that are watching this. And I know right now our audience, the audience is a lot of people that go to the church. And maybe you were in the church, maybe you've been part, or you're doubting and all these things, and like, what do I do? How do I take a step? Because I took steps, and now I'm in this place where I'm stuck, and my doubts have overwhelmed me, and I see the world around me. I see my world around me, and it's a bunch of junk. You're going to have to make another step. And maybe this one's harder than the first, because the first, you didn't have much that it felt like it was that hard. I mean, this one might be harder. And you doubt because you know the next step that you're called to is a step of releasing something, giving something up, acknowledging your humility, acknowledge that you need to be humble and not be like the world and live for pride. It's a step. You know, for me, the step that began to shift everything came not by my choosing. It came by a step of being faithful to my parents. Honestly, they wanted me in a place in my life. I was questioning, doubting, and moving away from everything, and they wanted me to do something involving the church, and so I did. I trusted them. I followed their leading. I trusted them, and then God, He blessed that. You know, it wasn't like I came to this great place of belief. It was started with honoring your father and your mother. You know, I didn't want to go to camp, but my mom did. Aunt told me she wanted me to go to camp, and so I went. And God got a hold of me when I was completely ignoring the speaker, ignoring everything. And so I say that because Jesus said, do what you're going to do and do it quickly. You have to take a step, and the step is to be obedient to his leading, and in some capacity be obedient to his leading in your life, obedient to your parents, obedient to his word, obedient to showing love, showing grace. And as you do that, the barriers of our life become pliable, and God will change us, and your doubt will change, and you'll see things in a new way. And if you've stopped, which happens a lot, right? We stop a lot in our life on this journey, but we have to take another step, because it's not, we get to retirement and then we quit. There is no retirement in following Christ. It's just like in a marriage. You can't retire in your marriage. Oh yeah, we've been married 20 years. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. It doesn't work. You still have to. This is not how that works. And this is not how it works with Christ either. There's no retirement in the church. That's a silly concept, because this is about a relationship. It's about a walk following him wherever he leads us. And that there's no end of that. And you shouldn't want there to be an end, because when you stop, the world will consume you. And it does, right? It consumes you, and you feel the doubt creep in and all that stuff. So I encourage you on this Easter, as he is risen, rise up yourself, take a step towards the cross, towards the empty tomb, past Friday through Sunday, into a new life where he is Lord and Savior of your life. God has faith in you. God believes in you more than you believe in yourself. He has faith that you can overcome the challenges that are before you. And he has left the church in our hands because he loves us and he trusts us. May you go in the name of Christ, may go in his peace, as he is risen and he has conquered death, and he is our Lord and our Savior. Let him be your watchword and song. Let him be your Lord in the midst of your life. Let his love dwell deeply in your soul. May God bless you and keep you.